The Cold War. Two words that evoke fear and tension. A period marked by rivalry and suspicion. The main players, the United States of America and the Soviet Union. Two superpowers locked in a global struggle. It began after World War II. The world was divided. On one side, democracy and capitalism, on the other, communism. The ideological clash was inevitable. The USA and the USSR stood on opposite ends of this spectrum. Their rivalry was not fought on battlefields. Instead, it was a war of threats and propaganda. Each side sought to expand its influence. The stakes were high. The world watched anxiously as the drama unfolded. The Cold War lasted for decades. It shaped international relations. It influenced politics, economics, and society. The tension was palpable. The fear was real. This was the Cold War. It was Winston Churchill who coined the term Iron Curtain. His speech in 1946 was a warning about the growing divide in Europe. The Iron Curtain symbolized the separation of East and West. The Soviet Union sought to control Eastern Europe. They established communist governments. Freedom was restricted. People were oppressed. The Iron Curtain was both a physical and ideological barrier. Churchill's speech was a call to action. The West needed to stand firm. The USA took this to heart. They saw the spread of communism as a threat to their way of life. The Iron Curtain became a rallying cry. The division was stark. On one side, freedom. On the other, oppression. The Iron Curtain was a symbol of the Cold War, a symbol of the struggle between two opposing ideologies. Berlin was a city divided. After World War II, it was split into East and West. The Soviets controlled the East. The Allies controlled the West. Tensions were high. In 1948, the Soviets blocked all access to West Berlin. The city was cut off. No food, no supplies. The people were desperate. The USA and its allies responded. They launched the Berlin airlift. Planes flew day and night. They brought food, fuel, and hope. For nearly a year, the airlift continued. The Soviets tried to break the will of the West, but they failed. The Berlin airlift was a success. It was a symbol of determination and resilience. The blockade ended in 1949. West Berlin was saved. The Cold War had its first major confrontation. The Berlin airlift showed the world that the West would not back down. It was a victory for freedom. The Korean War was another flashpoint. Korea was divided after World War II. The North was communist. The South was democratic. In 1950, North Korea invaded the South. The world was on edge. The USA led a coalition to defend South Korea. The fighting was brutal. Cities were destroyed. Lives were lost. The Korean War was a proxy war, a war between the ideologies of the Cold War. The conflict raged for 3 years. Neither side could claim victory. In 1953, an armistice was signed. The Korean Peninsula remained divided. The war left a lasting legacy. It was a reminder of the Cold War's reach. The Korean War was a test of resolve. It showed the lengths to which both sides would go. It was a bloody chapter in the Cold War, a chapter marked by sacrifice and suffering. Section 5. The Cuban Missile Crisis, on the brink of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the world came to nuclear war. In 1962, the Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the USA. The tension was unbearable. The stakes were unimaginable. President John F. Kennedy demanded the removal of the missiles. The world held its breath. For 13 days, the crisis unfolded. It was a high-stakes game of brinkmanship, a game that could end in nuclear annihilation. The USA imposed a naval blockade. The Soviets stood firm. The world waited. Finally, a deal was struck. The Soviets would remove the missiles. The USA would not invade Cuba. The crisis was averted. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a turning point. It showed the dangers of the Cold War. It showed how close the world could come to destruction. It was a sobering reminder of the stakes involved. Section 6. The Space Race. Battling beyond Earth. The space race was a different kind of battle. It was a battle for supremacy in space. The USA and the Soviet Union competed to achieve milestones. It was a race that captured the world's imagination. The Soviets took an early lead. In 1957, they launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. It was a shock to the USA. They responded with their own efforts. The space race was on. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, another Soviet victory. But the USA was determined. They set their sights on the moon. In 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong took his famous steps. The space race was more than a competition. It was a demonstration of technological prowess. It was a battle for prestige. The Cold War extended beyond Earth. It reached the stars. Section 7. Psychological warfare. The fear that gripped the world. The Cold War was not just about military might. It was also about psychological warfare. Both sides used propaganda to influence minds. Fear was a powerful tool. It was used to control and manipulate. The USA and the Soviet Union portrayed each other as enemies. They spread fear of nuclear war. They spread fear of communism and capitalism. The Cold War was fought in the minds of people. Governments used media to spread their messages. Films, radio, and literature became weapons. The fear of the unknown was exploited. The Cold War created an atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia. People lived in constant fear. Fear of the bomb, fear of invasion, fear of espionage. The psychological impact was profound. The Cold War was a war of the mind as much as it was a war of politics. Section 8. The nuclear threat, living under the shadow of the bomb. The nuclear threat was a constant presence. The USA and the Soviet Union amassed huge arsenals. The power to destroy the world was in their hands. The fear of nuclear war was ever present. Both sides developed strategies. Mutually assured destruction, or MAD, was the doctrine. If one side launched, the other would respond. Total destruction was guaranteed. It was a grim reality. Nuclear tests were conducted. The power of the bomb was displayed. The world watched in horror. The threat of nuclear war loomed large. It was a shadow that hung over the Cold War. People built bomb shelters. They practiced drills. The fear of the bomb was a part of daily life. The Cold War was a time of uncertainty, a time when the world could end in an instant. Section 9. Espionage and intrigue. Spies in the shadows. Espionage was a key part of the Cold War. Both sides had networks of spies. Information was a valuable commodity. Spies operated in the shadows. They gathered secrets. They influenced events. The USA had the CIA. The Soviet Union had the KGB. These agencies were at the forefront of the espionage war. They conducted covert operations. They manipulated governments. They played a dangerous game. Famous spies emerged. Some were caught and betrayed. The stories of espionage were thrilling. They added an element of intrigue to the Cold War. It was a world of deception and danger. Espionage was not just about gathering information. It was about shaping the course of the Cold War. Spies played a crucial role. They were the unseen soldiers of this conflict. Their actions had far-reaching consequences. Section 10. The fall of the Berlin Wall, a symbol of change. The Berlin Wall was a symbol of division. It separated East and West Berlin. It was a physical manifestation of the Iron Curtain. In 1989, the wall fell. It was a moment of triumph, a moment of change. The fall of the Berlin Wall marked the beginning of the end. The people of East Berlin surged through. They tore down the wall. It was a powerful symbol, a symbol of the desire for freedom. The world watched in awe. The Cold War was coming to an end. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a turning point. It was a moment that signaled hope, a moment that signaled a new beginning. The fall of the wall was more than a physical event. It was a symbolic end to the Cold War. It represented the triumph of freedom over oppression. It was a moment that changed history. Section 11. The dissolution of the Soviet Union, the end of an era. The Cold War ended with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. In 1991, the USSR ceased to exist. It was a momentous event. An era had come to an end. The world was forever changed. The Soviet Union faced internal struggles, economic problems, political unrest. The pressure was too much. The republics declared independence. The Soviet Union was no more. The end of the Soviet Union marked the end of the Cold War. The USA emerged as the sole superpower. The ideological battle was over. The world entered a new era, an era of uncertainty and hope. The Cold War had shaped the world for decades. Its end was a major turning point. The dissolution of the Soviet Union was the final chapter. The Cold War was over. A new chapter in history had begun.